Nos dias 14, 15 e 16 de julho de 2014, aconteceu em Fortaleza a sexta cúpula dos chefes de Estado dos BRICS. Nessa oportunidade foi adotada a Declaração e o Plano de Ação de Fortaleza e, mais importante, foi criado o novo Banco de Desenvolvimento dos BRICS. Num outro lugar, distante do centro de convenções onde aconteceu a cúpula, aconteceram também os diálogos das sociedades civis sobre desenvolvimento. Chamados pelas organizações brasileiras, esses diálogos contaram com a participação de pessoas do mundo inteiro. Como parte do projeto Poderes Emergentes, Sexualidade e Direitos Humanos, o Observatório de Sexualidade Política documentou os diálogos e entrevistou ativistas, pesquisadores e pesquisadoras sobre a sua visão do fenômeno dos BRICS. E, mais importante, exploramos como as questões de gênero, sexualidade e direitos humanos se situam nesses debates. Em parceria com a Fábrica de Imagens, produzimos 8 vídeos que agora apresentamos a vocês com muito prazer.
I came to Fortaleza not just for the civil society forum, but more broadly to see what happens around the BRICS summit. As you know, we're working with SPW on various dialogues relating to BRICS and sexuality, and this is kind of part of that. The way in which civil society is imagining BRICS is very much in terms of the new development bank, and the financial institutions that are being raised as seemingly a challenge to what already exists, to the Bretton Woods kind of structures. It's an attempt at intervening in the economy of development. Who are the BRICS? Who is the BRICS Bank? Are these governments that have accountability to their polities? Are these corporations? Are these governments acting for corporations, etc., etc.? There's also the big question of who is affected by BRICS, and there is a certain narrative through which there's a re-victimization of the African continent. It's being seen as there's a BRICS Bank, which is an attempt at the largest scramble for Africa. That seemed to be the dominant narrative in civil society, in the various civil society spaces that I had a chance to engage with in the last few days. And I think this framing misses a lot of very crucial aspects. For instance, there are more poor people in India than there are in the entire continent of Africa. There's a range of different ways in which this new formation of global capitalism is actually articulating, and I don't think it's a good idea to focus down on finding that one victim and finding that one aggressor, because the aggressor itself is various.
Much more complex.
It's much more complex.
Diffuse and much more contradictory.
Yeah. I can see the seduction of looking at BRICS as the bank and the financial institutions, because if you're looking at a civil society kind of formation that is the BRICS, there cannot be a coherence, right? There is no coherence of the civil society space. There cannot be, and there probably should not be. Mm-hmm. And the reason I'm saying that is because in each of these countries, there is a different kind of history and relationship between civil society organizations, people's movements, and more broadly, politics. In the bigger civil society forum, the Dialogos event, which was, for me, it was fascinating because I had an opportunity to engage with these Brazilian social movements that I've heard so much about and read so much about, and a large part of the new social movement literature is based on these experiences. So for me, it was like a very exciting kind of moment. But then there was an absolute absence of a similar presence from India, or from China, or from Russia. Now I try to figure out how that happened, or why that happened. And the fact is that for us to have these conversations requires money. Our conversations are still mediated by, enabled by the development industry of the West, of Europe and North America. What made it possible for me to be here is the fact that I work at an institution in the UK. I have a certain project which gets funding from a given a Western institution, etc., etc. We have to think in terms of the political economy of engagement of different movements. That's one thing that clearly, is a challenge for coming up with a coherent civil society and people's movements plus politics kind of response to this new intervention in global capitalism. So we have to think in terms of the political economy of development. Yeah. And it's ironic that this is happening in a context where that's precisely what the BRICS is about. Now, the problem, of course, is that the institution of BRICS is dominated by corporate interests of these different countries. There's certain ways in which India, China, Russia, Brazil, and South Africa are imagined in that space. And if I were to come up with a gross oversimplification, Brazil is the place where the politics comes from, where the movement comes from, etc. China is that evil other who actually dominates this entire thing. And of course, the longer history of how China is imagined as, without human rights, and you cannot speak and all that kind of stuff, which I think was challenged by Kai Yiping in the plenary as well. I don't know what to say about Russia, because there was a complete absence. But and South Africa was clearly the victim. As far as India is concerned, almost all the conversations I had began primarily with the fact that women face sexual violence in India. It's this
place of sexual violence.
Yeah, huh? And that's about it. Which is why it brings us back to then how do we generate the conditions for actual collaboration between people's movements. That's at one level. At another level is the larger question of politics, which is not contained in people's movements. I think there are big challenges, big changes happening in all our countries. The history of Hindutva goes down, a long way back. Looking at the 20s and 30s, or looking at that being an aspect of the nationalist movement. There's a long kind of history which has engaged with questions of fascism and the Nazi phenomenon, etc., etc. It's very important to recognize that it emerges as a political formation from the emergency. The emergency, which was our moment of dictatorship. Every post-colony has a dictator. Ours was Indira. At least our first dictator was Indira Gandhi. Now, from then on, there's various different theories, and I think many of them ring true, where there's the construction of somehow an emasculated Hindu masculinity, right? Which is blamed onto the other, onto the Muslim other, etc. And this is Thomas Blom. One of the theories is by Thomas Blom Hansen, and it's about enabling young men in cities to become entrepreneurs by supporting them financially, etc., but also building this masculinity kind of thing. Now, my sense is that we've passed that stage of a recuperation of masculinity kind of frame, where there is the emergence of an aggressive Hindu masculinity in its own right, which is now ready to take on the world, the pulsating penis of of India is now ready. We buy the corporation that comes to our country to exploit, etc., etc. Indira was the last, rather post Indira was the last time that there was a single party in majority in parliament. The relationship of citizenship, what it meant to be Indian, was a relationship with Indira. Right? She was the mother. Now, post Indira, we see the emergence of coalition politics and the rise of regional parties, the significance of regional politics in the constitution of the nation. So when one voted for, the entire process of voting for the nation in the general elections was no more about that one figure. It became about politics rather than that one relationship. And I think many of us started taking it for granted that coalition politics is here to stay. Coalition politics is what brought us the right to information, the right to education, the Rural Employment Guarantee Act, etc., etc.
Human rights agendas,
etc.
all over different.
So what we had with this Modi campaign was to return to a structure where citizenship is a relationship with one figure.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
It's a man.
It's a man.
And it's Modi, and it's the man of the Hindutva.
Yeah, and he's the man who has risen from below, etc., etc. There's a strange parallel with the American dream and with Obama, etc. There's something, but it is about the ability of that Hindu masculine figure to rise. So what citizenship now means is an erotic figure, is an erotic relationship, a relationship of continuity between that aggressive masculinity and the self. And women are all supposed to love him, and men are supposed to want to be like him. Now, and of course, there's a lot to be said about the homoerotics of Hindutva, etc. Which is far more
complicated.
Yeah, we can talk about that some other.
Another interview.
Yes. And of course, it's not to say that this is fascism. I think it's important to look at what happened in Italy with Mussolini, etc., etc., but not to think of it simply as
Transposition. It's not the transposition, but there are elements there.
Yeah, there are strong elements. The charismatic, masculine figure. Modi's first speech in the space of the parliament, he makes a statement about who this election victory is dedicated to. And he starts with, koti koti yuvak ko, and which is, to each and every youth. Right? And then there's an and also for our mothers and daughters who have been clamoring for respect. Right? So what you see there is that the nation is imagined as the youth, which is the man, the young man, the entrepreneurial Hindu masculine figure, and the women who deserve protection. If you look at the statement that's come out of the BRICS summit, so, we've worked very hard on wording it well, where they say, I think it's para 57, where they say that, there's a commitment to sexual and reproductive health and to reproductive rights, not to sexual rights. Rights relate to reproduction. I haven't yet read the speeches written by presented by the other heads of state. I've read Modi's. And what I realize is that, actually the declaration that comes out of the summit is a different process, there's something else being negotiated there. And Modi's speech is essentially speaking back to the Indian audience. What is he saying? And this is absolutely striking. What is he saying? He's saying that there is a crisis of security in the region between Afghanistan and the Middle East. What is that? That's Pakistan. Right? That we need to invest more in Afghanistan in terms of development. And that's precisely what, every time there is an imperial war, the development industry lands up over there, etc., etc. Right? What he's building towards is a kind of collective thing that enables and justifies a war, because centering the question of security, terrorism. I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into into it. But he was definitely speaking to an Indian audience. He was not. It was not an intervention in terms of the declaration coming out of the summit. I think firstly we need to recognize that the struggle is not against this thing called BRICS. It's against global capitalism. I think the strategy of solidarity has played its role. I think we need a politics of collaboration. And I'm not saying anything completely new. This is, with the experiments of the World Social Forum and all that kind of stuff, these things have been tried. But I think what is different now is that there are these new modalities of political action that are taking place. And this has a lot to do with the new technological conditions, the material conditions of both capitalism and the possibilities of resistance, of new appropriations of surveillance of power, etc., etc. We have to recognize the new conditions. My slight frustration with several of the conversations that's happened in the last 3 days is about a constant return to the politics that we already know. So it's the trade union structure, or the people's movement structure, or the civil society structure. All these were in a state of, where did that happen? How did that happen when Rio burst into flames last year, or when Tahrir happened? Neither the political establishment nor civil society knew that was about to happen. We need to, therefore, let go of that. I don't know what it is, whether it's a failure of the imagination or a desire to constantly believe that we already have the answer. And be brave enough to say, no, we don't. These are new conditions. We need to be engaging and thinking and coming up with new ideas and talking to each other and working together to come up with new ways of recognizing the problem and addressing it. I think that's the
main challenge.
Yeah.
Main challenge.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Huh?
A pleasure.
Namaste.
Namaste.